Thanks for joining us for this Sunday morning's sermon. I want to let you know that at the end of the sermon today, there'll be a time for us to partake communion together. We received communion packets this week, and hopefully you either are able to pick up a communion packet, or if not, you can improvise with some emblems at your own home. For the last 3 Sundays, Barb and I have used grape juice and Zesta crackers. But get your communion ready, and at the end of the sermon, we're going to partake together. The challenge of the coronavirus pandemic has been difficult for most of us. We know the stories. We see the heroes in the fields of health and medicine. We watch the daily news briefings with Governor DeWine at 2 o'clock. We see the empty shelves at the grocery store. We're trying to figure our way of how to muddle through all of this. The Final Four of basketball was to have been last night and tomorrow night. We're starting to hear now about a test that can tell us in 5 minutes if we have COVID-19. We've heard the great reports about Battelle Research and how they've designed a machine to clean 160,000 masks each day. But there's still a lot of unknown about this pandemic. Will it be over at the end of April? Will we be looking at a continuance at the stay-at-home order until the end of May? And for the Christian, the question that becomes very real is, are we going to live by fear or by faith? Fear is the natural inclination that we have due to the unknown. We fear what we cannot see. And right now, there doesn't seem to be an immediate end in sight. But interestingly, faith is also believing what you cannot see. The Bible defines faith in this manner in Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The most repeated command God gives human beings in Scriptures, do you know what it is? It's not one of the 10 commandments. It's not one of the 2 greatest commandments, which are love God and love people. The most repeated command that God gives us is fear not, or do not be afraid. Those are the words that an angel spoke at the birth of Jesus to the shepherds. Those are the words that Jesus shared with his disciples in the upper room the night before his crucifixion. And the question of living by fear or by faith is one the Israelites had to wrestle at a very fearful moment in their nation's history as well. It's a story which most of us know, even if we've never read it in the Bible. You've probably seen or at least heard about the movie. The movie, The 10 Commandments, became very popular because of the scene where the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. Years ago, you could ride a tram at Universal Studios in Los Angeles, and you could experience the Red Sea crossing. I did that when I was a little boy back in the late 1960s. Well, I want us to unpack today a passage from Exodus 14 in the Old Testament as the Israelites as a nation are about to hit an impasse. There is a body of water in front of them called the Red Sea. They are camped at the Red Sea with their leader Moses, and scholars estimate there are probably between 2 and 3 million people. I'm going to represent the Israelites. Then there's the Egyptian army that's coming after them. You are going to represent the Egyptian army. I think this will be kind of fun, well, at least for now, because you're not going to like the ending nearly as much as I am. Just a few days earlier had been the 10 plagues, the death angel passing over their homes, the sparing of the firstborn sons for those whose homes had blood placed over the doorways. And Pharaoh releases the Israelite slaves after centuries of oppression. But now the Egyptian army is coming after the Israelites full force. The Egyptian army was massive, and the Israelites would have been able to hear the hoofbeats of the horses, the roar of the chariots, see the cloud of dust. They knew they were in big trouble, and they are afraid, and they are trapped. Well, we're going to pick up the story in Exodus chapter 14, verses 10 through 12, as we begin a new series of sermons today entitled Being an Overcomer. And today's is Faith Over Fear. Exodus 14, beginning at verse 10. Verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." There is a cycle of fear that's running throughout this 2 to 3 million person encampment. They were terrified. Then they get sarcastic. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt you brought us to the desert to die? Then they started thinking the worst case scenario. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Notice first with me our natural response. The Israelites are understandably having a very natural human response to their situation when their backs are against the wall. We're at a time of our nation's history like none of us have ever seen. I can vaguely recall the Vietnam War. I can recall the Persian Gulf War in 1991 when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. I can remember vividly September the 11th, 2001, when terrorists attacked our nation on a Tuesday morning. But I cannot recall a time when we've seen such nationwide distress and in some areas of the country, complete panic. With people dying and that number increasing daily and the predictions of death continuing to soar, it's easy to get a lot more fearful. So the first natural response to a crisis is fear. We are told that the Israelites were terrified. As they looked around, all they could see were their immediate circumstances. It was the Red Sea before them and the Egyptian army behind them, and no way to escape. Do you make better or worse decisions when you're afraid? Are you one of those who hoarded more toilet paper than you could possibly use in the next year? Have you purchased enough Purell to be able to take a bath in the stuff? Maybe some of you have heard about the government's Peace Corps manual from several years ago and how it addresses some very scary situations. One of the pamphlets published by the Peace Corps have to do if you were serving in the Amazon, and that's not like the Amazon.com. This is like the Amazon, the region. And the pamphlet was entitled, "What to Do If Attacked by an Anaconda Snake." The anaconda is related to the boa constrictor, and it is in the family of the largest snake species in the world. It can grow up to 35 feet in length, and it can eat an animal up to 400 pounds whole. Oh, here are the instructions that are given to Peace Corps workers in that manual. Number 1, if you're attacked by an anaconda, do not run. The snake is faster than you are. Number 2, lie flat on the ground. Put your arms against your sides, your legs tight against one another. Number 3, tuck your chin in. Number 4, the snake will begin to nudge and climb over your body. Number 5, do not panic. Number 6, after the snake has examined you, it'll begin to swallow you from the feet end, always from the feet end. Permit the snake to swallow your feet and ankles. Do not panic. Number 7, the snake will now begin to suck your legs into its body. You must lie perfectly still. This will take a long time. Number 8, when the snake has reached your knees, slowly and with as little movement as possible, reach down, take your knife, and very gently slide it into the side of the snake's mouth between the edge of the mouth and your leg. Then suddenly rip the knife upward, severing the snake's head. Number 9, be sure you have your knife. It is natural to be afraid when your back is against the wall. But sometimes you make the worst decisions when you're afraid. You can be running when you need to be still. That's why we've seen such volatility in the stock market. People are fearful and they're pulling their investments. As Americans, we're a bit perplexed. We're feeling somewhat insecure. We're fearful, sometimes even panicky. And while I don't think God is causing this virus, I don't think, in other words, that it's His punishment of us as a nation, I do firmly believe that God is using it to get our attention. One of my mentors in ministry, Bob Russell, wrote in his blog last Sunday, "Consider our situation from a spiritual perspective. We worship money, and the booming economy comes grinding to a halt. We worship sports, and the biggest games are canceled. We worship entertainment and parades along with concerts, and they're postponed. Bars and restaurants closed, and the party life shut down. We worship science, and the leading medical experts disagree as to the proper course of action to counter the pandemic. We worship even our impressive churches, and now even our church buildings sit empty on Sunday mornings." Bob was so concerned about preachers developing a sense of fear during this that he sent out a 10-minute video of encouragement to thousands of preachers last Sunday night. Because the first natural human response to a crisis is fear. The second natural response to a crisis is sarcasm towards the leadership. The Israelites said, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die?" They're speaking to their leader, Moses. In other words, they're saying, what, did Egypt run out of cemetery plots? Were you too chintzy to have our funerals in Egypt instead of the wilderness? Now that's really a constructive conversation between the followers and the leaders. Sarcasm often exaggerates what happened. The people say, "Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians?" Why, that is not true at all. The people were begging both Moses and God to get them out of Egypt. And now they're playing the blame game. The president, if he had taken action sooner, we wouldn't be in this mess. If the governor issues one more order, I'm just going to scream. I'm going to take my kids to his place tomorrow and let him educate them. Now, you probably haven't said that, but many of you parents have thought it. Why weren't the hospitals better prepared? I thought they had contingencies for every emergency. Fear exasperates the problem even more, and sarcasm often occurs as a result of it. The third natural response to a crisis is start imagining the worst case scenarios. The Israelites look at their situation and they're predicting a horrible outcome. They say, it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Now we need to be realistic. This pandemic is affecting us all in some manner, but for some others it could mean a hospitalization. It could mean admitted to the ICU. For some, it even potentially could mean death. Faith does not sugarcoat reality, but it helps us to not focus on the gloom and doom perspective. Many people who've been diagnosed with COVID-19 have had mild symptoms. I know of at least 4 people in our church who've gone for testing, but all of them were denied because their symptoms were mild and most likely can recover very well at home. And faith does not always remove the obstacle, but it may give you a different path. So we're doing church a little bit differently right now, and that's okay. It's at this point in the story that Moses steps up and he puts on a sudden seminar on crisis and leadership management. And he says, whoa, time out. This is not helping. We need now a better plan. And that's what I want you to notice. As we move from our natural responses, let's look at a better plan. In Exodus 14, our text, back to verse 13. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you'll never see again." So here are 3 steps to help us have faith over fear and how we can be overcomers even during a very stressful national emergency. As Christians, we're not exempt from troubles, temptations, nor viruses that invade our world. This is an opportunity for us to live in this world and hopefully make a difference because of our faith and not our fear. Well, the first step to a better plan is fear not. That means we have to learn to tame the wild, irrational, fearful thoughts that can easily flood into our minds and into our souls. Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson announced early on they had COVID-19 while they were in Australia. Hanks tweeted, "Hello folks, Rita Wilson and I want to thank everyone here down under who are taking such good care of us. We have COVID-19 and are in isolation so we don't spread it to anyone else. There are those for whom it could lead to a very serious illness. We're taking it one day at a time. There are things we can all do to get through this by following the advice of experts and taking care of ourselves and each other. No? Remember, despite all the current events, there's no crying in baseball, Hanks." Of course, that was written when we still had baseball. You diminish fear by preparing yourself to ride this out and not freaking out. What does a heart surgeon do when he's in surgery and something goes wrong? Does he freak out or does he stay calm and focused? Mothers and fathers of sudden homeschool students, it's easy to panic a lot. It'd be easy to allow your minds to run wild and you'd be so nervous all the time you could barely function. Sure, you have days that are not good overall, but you learn to stay calm. You email the teacher. You check with other parents. I'm so proud of our teachers from our church who have been suddenly thrust into doing online teaching and learning. I know they have spent countless hours preparing and adjusting so they can continue to teach children. And I guarantee you that many of them entered that arena with some trepidation. But 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 says, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." Well, Paul, isn't it a bit fearful for the church to move all our services online for the next several weeks and to close the doors? Now, faith does not fear, but it should address circumstances responsibly. That is what love requires of us in this season. One of the basic principles of Christianity, according to Romans chapter 15, is that the strong consider the weak. We want to protect others from getting the virus. Now, remind you, social distancing does not mean social isolation. This is a time for the church to be the church. Yes, you need to wash your hands, be responsible. But it's also a time to learn to figuratively wash one another's feet, to serve where you can. Faith is going to be responsible. That means you check on your neighbors. You provide assistance if you can to someone whose hours were lessened or to someone who's been furloughed from their job. I've been so impressed with so many of our church people here. As of this past Tuesday, over 20 families in our church have stepped up and said, "We're willing to offer assistance to those who need it." Some of that assistance that's been offered is delivery services to those who can't or should not get out right now. Some of those have been folks that are offering to run errands for those who shouldn't get out. Some of those offers have been financial. We've already had donations given for additional benevolence funds in the last 2 weeks. This is a time for you to check on those in your small group. One of our small group members was furloughed from her job this past Tuesday. And that's probably going to happen for several others in our church in the weeks ahead. This is a time to be reminded that the church is not a building, but a body. That the church is not a place, but people. And to help us not to have the most gloom and doom reality, we need to understand that faith addresses the practical. Now, there have been some that have thought that churches should continue to meet and that maybe we're being overridden just a little bit with some government regulations. And while technically the government has not imposed any restrictions on us, our governor especially has asked that we recognize and practice social distancing to flatten the curve. Last Sunday, Pastor Rodney Howard Brown in Tampa, Florida, held church services where over 500 people gathered, and he turned himself in on Monday prior to his being arrested for unlawful assembly and disregarding the safety of public health. Our elders and I would love to tell you that we're having church services all together here at the church next week for Easter. But that would not be safe, as the number of coronavirus cases in Ohio exponentially increase this week. Our elders, David Brown and I, were in a Zoom meeting this past night with the elders, and the elders asked how I thought I would look in an orange jumpsuit at the Lincoln County Justice Center. I love having church. I love having church with us all together here. I miss the interaction with you when preaching, because it's not the same as preaching into a camera. But folks, it's not worth jeopardizing the health of 600 plus people right now. We don't want a worst case scenario for our church. The first step to a better plan is fear not. The second step to a better plan is stand firm. Stand firm. When you feel your back is against the wall, remember to continue to be a man or a woman of God and not allow circumstances to destroy your character and your witness for Jesus Christ. We don't get an exemption from good character during this crisis. That means you don't berate your child's teacher because he isn't responding to your questions as quickly as you'd like. That means you don't lose your cool in the checkout at the grocery store and start using expletives about the person who's in front of you. That means you don't cheat your company from time since you're working from home. You still give your very best effort. I think the test for most of us with our faith is the one of patience. We already know we have at least 25 more days of stay at home until the end of this month. And it is difficult for most of us to wait. But during this time, don't make rash decisions that would harm your faith and your trust in God. Commit that you're going to be obedient to God and His Word no matter what it takes. Several years ago, I presented a plan to our elders regarding additional staffing at a time when I thought it was needed. They met with me, they prayed about it, they looked at our situation, but they determined it wasn't the right timing. But I thought it was. In our leadership meetings, we always agree to not discuss our differences publicly. But this was now almost 10 years ago, and I saw a year or two after we had had that meeting where really their decision was the best. But during that same time, another congregation started pursuing me. I'd been here nearly 20 years, and I thought that after that decision that maybe my leadership effectiveness was somewhat diminished. That other congregation called, they emailed, they even sent a pulpit committee to visit me here. One Sunday morning I came in and there were at least 6 different people, 3 married couples throughout our, at that time, 2 different worship services scattered throughout to listen to the sermon from that church. But during that time, a new worship song came out entitled Never Once. Standing on this mountaintop, looking just how far we've come, knowing that for every step you are with us, kneeling on this battleground, seeing just how much you've done, knowing every victory was your power in us. Scars and struggles on the way, but with joy our hearts can say, yes, our hearts can say, never once did we ever walk alone. Never once did you leave us on your own. You are faithful. God, you are faithful. And I decided I needed to stay where I was. I needed to be patient. I needed to see what God will do. I think many of us are learning the lesson of patience more than we ever have before. And our being faithful to God is necessary because we're going to see that He's been faithful to us. Oh, the third and the final step to a better plan is expect God's help. Moses told the people to watch and see God's deliverance. When you're at the Red Sea in your life, what you believe about God theologically is revealed in that moment. When the pressure is on and the options are few or they're totally gone, do you believe God will help you? You know, if you trace the history of God working, you will see how often he has helped his sons and daughters. Gideon's 300 looked pitifully inept against the Midianite hordes, but Gideon won. Elisha was surrounded by King Aram's horses and chariots and thought he was doomed, but God stepped in. Lazarus looked very dead in the tomb, but God stepped in. Paul and Silas looked helpless in the Philippian jail, but God stepped in. The crucified Christ looked finished when nailed to the cross, but God stepped in. And we'll talk about that next week on Easter Sunday. And God stepped in for these Israelites too at the Red Sea. Psalm 78:13 reads, He divided the sea and led them through. He made the water stand up like a wall. In the 1998 animated movie Prince of Egypt, one of the songs is There Can Be Miracles. In the making of the movie, the producer selected a group of evangelical Christian preachers to review the script and the music. In the original version of that song, there was a phrase that said, You can do miracles if you believe. And the preachers objected to that wording, and they said, It's God who does the miracles, not the people. Well, the phrase was later changed to, There can be miracles when you believe. Exodus 14, verse 15. Then the Lord said to Moses, Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. The Israelites start moving forward. Moses raises his staff, and the water begins to divide. I love how it's recorded in the next chapter, Exodus 15, verse 8. By the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The surging water stood up like a wall. The deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. God created a wind that drove the waters back, and those 2 to 3 million Israelites could go through the sea and end up safe on the other side. God didn't take the Israelites around the Red Sea. He did not build for them a bridge over the Red Sea. He did not dig a tunnel under the Red Sea. God took them through the Red Sea. And in Exodus 15, the Israelites have a huge worship service, and they sing their praises to God. And when this pandemic has subsided and we can safely worship together again, I imagine it's probably going to be pretty awesome. We'll be able to look back, and we'll be able to celebrate how God got us through. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the sermon, I said I was the Israelites marching towards the Red Sea. I just walked through the Red Sea. You were the Egyptian army, and you just drowned. But God protected his people. We've been reminded through this pandemic that the world and its circumstances can change very quickly. None of us saw this coming over a month ago. New words have entered our vocabulary: COVID-19, coronavirus, social distancing, self-quarantine. 6 weeks ago, how many of us really knew the name of Dr. Acton? We've watched our investments and our 401ks that reached record highs suddenly tumble. But let me remind you of something that never changes: Jesus Christ. Hebrews 13:8 reads, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. This is the time in our worship services when we would share in communion to remember the one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. If you're not prepared at this moment to take communion, maybe later today you can set aside some time for your family to do that. If you need to, improvise. Maybe use water and a cookie, use juice and a cracker. But we're going to prepare to take communion together. So let's bow for a word of prayer. And if you have the home communion packets that we were able to provide, and if you were able to pick those up, we'll use these together. Let's pray together. Father, in the never-changing name of Jesus Christ, we ask you to remind us of your Son who lived, who died and who rose from the dead, and who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that sometimes the circumstances are not changed, but instead you get us through them. Circumstances may not change, but you may change us. And God, probably right now you are forging us into the people you want us to be. That can be difficult. That can be painful for us even. But God, if we need to grow in those areas where maybe we're feeling some of the heat right now, may we grow and may we come out on the other side much more mature and better representing the Christ that we claim to love and to serve. For it's in His name we pray. Amen. You can take off the top wrapper, which is the wafer. Let's partake together. You can then peel back the second layer, and you will have the juice in the cup, and let's partake together. I leave you with the words of the song I mentioned earlier, for they remind us how we can be an overcomer. Scars and struggles on the way, but with joy our hearts can say, yes, our hearts can say, never once did we ever walk alone. Never once did you leave us on our own. You are faithful. God, you are faithful. Until next Sunday, when we celebrate the Lord's resurrection.